Yes, I think it was an excellent presentation of the opportunities that are available for economic cooperation. And that platform is actually the basis for uh, the main elements of what we will discuss in the second session of this webinar. Uh, with the focus being that the Belt and Road Initiative has been the foundation for the economic corridor, China-Pakistan economic corridor, around which these economic or these special economic zones are being built. And that is the type of model that should be not only a process that is highlighted in Pakistan in working with the BRI, but it should become a general pattern worldwide. So I will make some initial remarks before I will present the speakers we have who will present and elaborate in detail some of the points that that I will simply touch on. First of all, I'm very happy to welcome all of our distinguished guests and speakers and business leaders, investors, professionals, and friends. Especially want to thank the ambassadors from Pakistan, our friend here in Sweden, Ambassador Ahmed, and Commercial Counselor Mustafa, as well as our good friend Ambassador Gui Konyu from China, for working with us in making this webinar a possibility. I am the vice chairman of the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden and responsible leader of our organization for webinars and seminars. The Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, which is referred to as BRICS, and I'll be the moderator for the second part of the event, which will focus on the importance of the BRI. The BRICS, our organization, was founded in 2018 with the explicit purpose of providing accurate and truthful information to the public about the Belt and Road Initiative. That is still our intention today, but it has become more challenging due to deliberate spreading of false information, misleading information by many media sources, primarily coming from the United States and Western Europe. Their intention has been to often distort the actual purpose of the BRI. So today we will be very much focused on making the actual elements and the importance of the BRI apparent to all of the participants. Because of that, our work has become perhaps slightly more difficult, but it still remains extremely important, and we are happy to take that challenge. So I will just briefly outline now, very briefly, 3 points, which I think are the essential aspects of understanding the role of the BRI for Pakistan, of course, but also for worldwide development. The BRI, as was indicated, was initiated by the president of China, Xi Jinping, in 2013 as a global development perspective for economic cooperation. It was and is still open to all nations who wish to participate. I emphasize that it was initiated by China. It is not run by China. It is a forum for worldwide cooperation of all countries. At this time, there are upwards of 134 countries in the world that are already cooperating in some form with the BRI. And that is approximately 4.3 billion people, which makes up about 62% of the world's population who are participating in some form, which certainly makes it a worldwide strategic important process. The second point is that a key and fundamental point of the BRI is to work for economic cooperation and investment, specifically in areas of infrastructure development, that is, as has been mentioned here, focused on water management, energy development, electrification, transport, healthcare, digital electronics, and all new types of technologies. So development in this context clearly means the elimination of poverty worldwide. The objective of eliminating poverty in all nations among all people. And this is something that China has successfully achieved for its own people in 2020. That is and should be a standard, not only for China, but for the world as a whole. That means Africa, it means Southwest Asia, what is often called the Middle East. It means India, it means South and Central America. And it certainly means all areas which to this day are still in one form or another denied proper development, meaning industrialization and modernization. And the last point, which I will touch on simply, is the idea of international economic cooperation is the foundation for achieving this goal of poverty elimination. The fundamental principle, which was established by the 1648 Peace of Westphalia, which ended the horrendous 30 Years' War in Europe, was built on the principle of defending was built on the principle of the Treaty of Westphalia to the idea of defending the interests of the other. Coming out of the war, the point was it was not simply a question of defining and defending your own interests or your own self-interest. It was the question of thinking about the interests of the other, those outside of yourself. These are the principles which define, in many sense, the basis for the United Nations Charter for the protecting of sovereign interests of all nations. And this has been referred to by China's president in reference to the BRI as a community for the shared interests of mankind, or a win-win strategy. However, the idea for shared interests or the common interests of mankind is not unique to China. Many great Western thinkers, such as Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, at an earlier period, have articulated these fundamental ideas of defining the common interests of mankind for human progress. And it is to those great thinkers we should turn to again today, because if the spirit of cooperation is undermined, we are looking into the face of conflict, confrontation, and potentially even war threatening the destruction of civilization. The dangers are there. I think everyone in one way or another either should be or are aware of those dangers. in that context, I would call on all the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, as well as the European Union, and all European nations to, in principle, join and cooperate openly with the BRI as a perspective and a project for global development and elimination of poverty. And the question of world peace is not simply the lack of conflict, because without cooperation, especially as we have outlined today in the economic zones, it will not be possible to potentially avoid the tragedies of conflict which are threatening globally. So I think that we have some excellent speakers who are going to elaborate on these points in their own way and highlight. The first one I want to welcome is a former minister who had spoken at one of our earlier webinars from Italy, Michele Gerace, the Deputy Minister, Italian Ministry of Economics Development, who is actually, I think, speaking to us from China at this point, and has done an excellent video on the success of China in eliminating poverty, which ought to be something that would be recognized as a great achievement by the whole world, including my country. I'm a double citizen of Sweden as well as the United States. And I would take the moment now to say that it would be in the United States' interest to join the BRI. As a citizen of the United States, even if I am at the moment not being heard by our government, I would still emphasize that that is in the interest of humanity, the world, and even the United States as a whole. So with that said, I will invite Mr. Gerace to make his remarks, and I thank you for being with us. You can unmute. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I am grateful to you for the invitation, for the opportunity to be here with you today and to talk to such a wide and group of experts. You're right. I'm currently in China. I've attended the Boao Forum last week in the island of Hainan. And of course, the key theme of the discussion was the Belt and Road, the achievement that China and the countries have made in the last few years, and really more about what needs to be done next. For those who don't know, everyone knows that the Boao Forum is kind of considered maybe the Davos of Asia. And it's not just, there are very similarities, just like the Belt and Road and the Boao Forum. They're kind of two initiatives initiated by China. The Boao Forum is physically in the Hainan Island, but they're really not just something about China. There's something about anyone who is interested in helping developing any part of the world. And it can be done for two reasons. It can be done for ethical reasons. One can say developing countries need to participate in the wealth that the Western countries have created, sometimes at the expenses of those countries, because we must not forget our own history. And sometimes it's for economic reasons. What we call it the double bottom approach. So whether one wants to be part of the Belt and Road to make money, which is fine, or just to help, which is also fine. Those are two reasons that were emphasized in this forum. And it's been like with the narrative that China and all the participating countries have given. Italy, like you kindly reminded, Stephen, is one of the first, let's say, large countries to be part of it. The first G7 countries. I personally pushed for Italy to join this initiative. There were lots of misunderstandings. We were criticized by our American friends, by our European friends, for Italy doing something out of the pack, as if every country needs to always ask other countries before doing something. We tend to think that we are an independent country in Italy. We are members of a number of international organizations, European Union, NATO, and Atlantic Alliance, etc., that we respect, but that does not mean that we cannot entertain direct conversation, whether diplomatic or commercial relationship with any of the countries in the world. And in fact, what Italy did in the MOU was the first of a series of things that the countries who criticize us did. First, the US-China Phase 1 agreement, that is an agreement that the US has the right and the interest to pursue without needing to ask me. You know, Lighthizer didn't call me and say, Michele, I'm setting up a Phase 1 agreement, which, by the way, will divert Chinese imports from Europe into America. So America will benefit and Europe may suffer. He didn't call me, and he was right. He shouldn't call me. He can pursue. His duty is to do the interest of his American citizen. So I applaud this agreement. That is kind of an MOU that the American did with China on trade. The European Union also did its own agreement at the recent. We need to see what happens to it. But anyway, at the moment, there is on the plate an investment agreement, the CAI, with China that tends to do what? Tends to help companies that want to invest in China. And again, I think this is good for the European Union as a whole. To be honest, I think this is not very good for Italy because we don't really have any companies that will invest in China. This is good probably for Germany that has 3.4 Volkswagen cars made in China. It's good for France that sells Airbus to China Eastern and so on. And we'll see. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying that everyone does their own agreement in the interest of a group, and that they don't always need to communicate with others. Because this is one thing I want to tell our friends who are maybe not familiar with Europe. Europe is a strange alliance. We are partners when we do trade policy, when we set tariffs. And by the way, we're not really partners. We are obliged to have the same tariff, and sometimes certain tariff favor certain countries, certain industries, not others. So there's a bit of confusion there in the common, in the custom union policy, which is, it creates divisions within Europe. But anyway, we have the same policy. But then when it comes to promotion of products, exports and investment, we have to be honest, we are fierce competitors. And I go to the key point of why, one example, why I wanted Italy to push for it. I would like, even if I'm not in government at the moment, that the Italian government, and I insist with them, with my colleagues who run the country now, to insist that Italy should be the terminal of the Belt and Road. The Mediterranean is in a strategic position that would benefit from containers arriving from China, from the rest of Asia, from all the parts, even from Africa, into our Italian ports. This is one thing I want to do it. Why do I want to do it? Does it mean that I want more, I don't know, Chinese fake goods to come into Europe? No. Do I want more imports for China that would destroy our economy? No. But those things will happen without my control. All I can do is for the containers to be diverted into, for example, the Italian ports, so that we can check what comes in, we can check the quality, we can give jobs to people who work in our ports to offload and load containers. That means more GDP, more employment for the local economy. And that's why I talk about ports, and that's why I made the premise on the European Union, because if we don't do it in Italy, other countries in Europe do it. And once the goods arrive in Rotterdam, they are free to trade, to travel in the rest of Europe. And I don't know if we have some Dutch friends on the line, but we do know that with the 15 million TEUs a year, we can only check 1% of those with a sound scanner. But that's fine. I'm not doubting the quality of how the Rotterdam port is organized, but I'm saying that Italy and Holland, we can be friends, but for ports, we are fierce competitors. One container more in Trieste or Genova is one container less in Rotterdam, one container less in Marseille, one less in Greece, one less in Hamburg, and one less maybe in Antwerp and the other ports of Europe. So this is the strange thing that we compete for practical purposes. And so one of the many rationale for Italy joining the Belt and Road was exactly to try to entice more business to arrive into Italian ports, which is our own economic interest. So I understand the criticism. Of course, that means we could take business out of Holland, out of Germany, out of France, but c'est la vie. That's why we do compete. And I think that's also why we got criticized, because maybe for the first time, Italy was taking a more active role, maybe out of the pack, more active. Like that is the correct word, less passive than in the past. Now, all the risks that the Belt and Road can have, we have analyzed them all. I'm a former banker, so I like numbers and I like analysis on which to base political decisions. And there were some, but we look at them and we thought they did not apply to Italy. So we are not a small country with a 50 billion GDP. We're a country with 1.7 trillion GDP. Unfortunately, this year, 1.6 trillion GDP. So we cannot fall into that trap. We cannot be fragile to Chinese political influence if China, sends a couple of containers into our ports. We're talking about hundreds of millions, maybe billions, but not in the order of 1.7 billion. We had the example of Montenegro in the last few days. 1 billion is a lot for Montenegro. It's nothing for Italy. So China has invested only 20 billion euros stock since the beginning of mankind. I don't know if there are any French friends online, but I personally am more worried about predatory M&A from France, not from China. And I say this, I've said it to the Ministry of Trade in France, I've delivered the message indirectly to Mr. Macron. And again, we are competing, it's part of the game that in economy, in a fair way, we do compete with each other. And if I was Vivande, if I was Airbus, if I was a French company, Saint-Nazaire, I would like to be very fearful with Italian telecom companies, with Italian Fincantieri. That's their job and they are right to do it. So I do think and I give you my political reading and I conclude here. The main reason for criticizing countries that enter the Belt and Road is not political, but it's economic. But the political narrative gets hold on the media. It is easy to sell. It is easy to sell, oh, why do you deal with countries that do not respect human rights? Why do you deal with countries that have Hong Kong? Why do you deal with countries that have pollution? It's very easy to capture, and people then fall into this trap. It would not be easy to sell the idea, why do you join the Belt and Road and you want to take business from us? And I say, because I'm paid by my Italian citizen to do it. And of course, and so the economic argument is never discussed as a reason to criticize countries to join the Belt and Road, because it will be immediately defeated. But a political argument on higher level, it does really capture the imagination of the listeners, and so it gets hold. And that's why I always say these Belt and Road things are economic treaties, they're not even treaties, sorry, they're MOUs, agreements, and there are no obligation. If countries feel that they have an ethical problem to do business with the US for the past, for Italy for the past, for China for the past, and so on, they don't do business. No one is forcing individual companies to do any business. And at the end of the day, this is how our open economies work. The government has set a framework to allow companies to do business in a better environment. If there's a problem, they can call the government to government tries to solve it. So the B2B problem gets raised to G2G. But if any company says, no, I do not want to be part of this project, I do not want to benefit, or I think the risk, fine. That's the key message. It's an option, but there is no obligation on the side of the companies. They can freely choose to be part or not. I stop here, giving you this half economic and half political angle, but I do think that the opportunities are there, and we need to look at them with an analytical way, not ideological, because ideological is always, I think this, you think that, and we would never agree on anything. The numbers always find the way into this negotiation, find an easy way for differences to be smoothed. And as a professor, I always say, let's get back to Excel spreadsheets that tend to solve problems. And I stop here. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thank you, Professor Geraci. We will be able to, many things you have said will open a lot of points of discussion. So I'm very grateful for that. I think our next speaker would be Mr. Henry Tillman, who is from England. He is the director of the China Investment Research at the UK, and I would welcome you, Mr. Tillman, to make your remarks to the webinar. Are you?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much. I thought I'd just do 3 quick introductory remarks before I jump to the slides, because it segues into everything I've heard the last 2 hours, fortunately. Number 1, on the returns and the CPEC and those investments, I can confirm about Pakistan's great returns the last few years. I'm presenting a webinar looking at returns in Pakistan, Bangladesh, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan on the 18th of May, and a webinar here in the UK for the City of London. So I can confirm what I've heard in frontier markets. Returns are very strong, whether it's venture capital or private equity or IPOs. Point 2, back to you remarks, Stephen. That's my one job, is the financing side. The other job is I run a proprietary database, and that database is based upon facts, which are linked to numbers, which are linked to raw data. And I do that in conjunction with universities. So I publish with China, and it's done on an academic basis. And what you're going to be seeing in a few minutes is based upon that. And we were honored to be published in conjunction. We co-authored with China, which is a rare feat, as Michele knows. And 3, Michele, this was what you're seeing today was actually excerpted and used at the Bao Forum last week. It was we were the cover story with the Beijing Examiner. I just couldn't go. I couldn't spend 2 weeks in a hotel, unfortunately, although I'm going to have to do it in November to speak for Shanghai City once a year, Belt and Road. So yes. And finally, Stephen, it does segue into what you talked about. There are ways that it's actually collaborating and working. So I want to show something quite concrete that people don't focus on. So with that as a start, I'll go into the share screen. This now straight away. Just a second. Slideshow should work. There we go. So what you're going to see here is only, and I've not done this for anyone in the West. This was done in conjunction with the Chinese government. It was approved by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Health, and MOFCOM. And it's our data. It was it took me 6 months, 19,000 words, 400 footnotes, and 500 companies we analyzed to pull this together. And it was, again, published by SIIS. It's released throughout Asia. I've not released it in the West for the reasons you're going to see in a few minutes. And they've asked me to keep it among friends, so which is what I'm doing today, because I know and trust BRICS, and Michaela, your reputation goes ahead of you with my friends and my friend Francesca, who sings your praises, basically. So with that as a background, it's in 6 months of work, and it's driven around data. So as you first heard, this is what it looks. I always show people what it looks like in October of 13, just to remind people that's the way it looked just, less than 8 years ago. Then what I show is by quarter, just again for the Health Silk Road as a brief entry for those of you that don't know it. China first started dealing with helping foreign countries in healthcare in 1963 in Algeria. And it wasn't only just for good news, because basically Algeria helped with automobiles or the like trucks they couldn't get from Russia. And then it went through Western Africa, across Africa, into Central Asia, and they built their first TCM, Chinese traditional medicine, in Afghanistan in 1975. So there's their 60-year history, 70-year history that China has done in this. And then, of course, if you didn't know this, it was first mentioned in 2015 by China's the party itself. It was launched in August of 2017 when President Xi said it in conjunction with the WHO. And then there were a couple of years when they started to roll out, but it didn't go that quickly, and it was only on certain diseases and certain medication. There was a great study done in April of 19 that talks about those first 2 years. And then because of COVID, it all changed very quickly. So what you see here in the next few slides, because there aren't many slides, is how China went from the 4th of January, really in difficult position in Wuhan, to the 4th of March when they got control of it and said, we're going to go help the rest of the world. So in a period of 4th of March to the end of October, which is 7 months, China reversed this and provided aid to over 150 countries. And you'll all know the story from so many people write about, here's this medical aid and here's this medical aid. What we did, because I'm like Michaela, I'm an ex-banker, still I'm a banker, I looked at all the numbers associated with that. So it's just not the medical assistance, it's all the things that go around it. We'll show you the various components. And it also then fed into the biotech industry of China, which was funded by technology from international markets and also from funding from international markets. So here's the first slide, Q319. You can see the blue, really it's the blue, that's the Belt and Road you see. But the blue dots are basically, these are countries receiving equity investments from China. And to give you some idea what's happening here, despite what regulators are saying, China started going into minority stakes and into investments less than 10 million US and 10% or below FDI in 2018. So by 2020, half of those investments externally are less than FDI and therefore not going to get a lot of attention from regulators. And you can see there's just a few blue dots where they were investing. And I should also say what we don't have in this document and what I didn't put through on the big document is all the inbound stuff from Europe beginning in 2005, which really helped build the biotech industry technology-wise in China, and especially from 2010 to 2020, when that was backed also by the Chinese government. So a few dots, all blue, all outbound, and that's the first quarter. This is again pre-COVID. Next slide, a few more dots, still all blue. These are countries just receiving equity investments from China. And I would say realistically, the inbound also had the same a number of dots from locations, but also the actually inflows in healthcare have been greater into China, at least those first 2 quarters, than they were outbound from China in those quarters as China continued to build its biotech industry and experiment with the whole concept of building vaccines. Then we go to Q1, and you start seeing other things that China is doing besides just that. So you see in the center, those are the medical assistance countries. You see those are 33 of those in the first, and we find those quite interesting because you see who gets the first call from China relative to medical assistance in Q1. You see an increase of flows from China investing in equity investments in those other countries. Again, these are very few controlling stakes. They're mostly growth capital to grow biotech and life sciences, as we heard. Well done, Denmark, for looking at this. So we're doing the UK as well. On the lower left-hand side, you see China then made its first, over 2 quarters, it donated 50 million to the World Health Organization. That puts them in 194 countries. And on the right-hand side, in the green dot, you'll see the first policy bank loan was made to Sri Lanka. So again, you can see the difference between, you can certainly see the difference between Q3, Q4, and Q1 with COVID. Here comes Q2. Incredible. That's why I don't show these dots. I don't show this in the West for the reason Stephen talked about a few minutes ago. 31 countries outbound, another 25 million into World Health Organization, and 75 countries now receiving medical assistance. And on the right-hand side, you see COVID loans from AIIB, and you also are seeing COVID loans from NDB. So if the West would see this, they would panic because of all the dots and how fast this moved. We finalized in Q3 because I had to end the data in Q3, but I'll follow up with specifics. Again, you see on the left-hand side the number of outbound investments. These are mostly joint ventures or drug licensing agreements. You see they've doubled in the last year. You see in the middle that we start talking about medical assistance in regions. We'll come on to this in a second because the Belt and Road is built on a hub and spoke model, which I didn't know about until China confirmed this with me as part of this Bao Forum. So you see the SCO we put in one bunch. We think CPEC is also much more than just Pakistan. We can talk about later. You then see loans below to Latin America. There were 13 countries involved in that for $1 billion to afford vaccines. You'll see AIIB COVID loans. Then you see NBD loans below that. And then you see, again, vaccines on the right where they're being tested. So again, we don't put these overlay because I think it sends a strong enough message by quarter, the number of dots by quarter. So our data stops at Q3 because we were supposed to publish in Q4, but my professors I work with at the think tank at SIIS had a book launch in Q4, so we didn't publish till Q1. So what I did for various different Chinese publications and from the think tank is update it through Q4. So here's the vaccine launch. To give you some idea of vaccines, you see that by the end of the year, these are the countries where there's either currently approved or signed agreements or under review. You'll see roughly 17 countries at that time. And again, to remind everybody that China launched its first vaccine a fortnight after Pfizer launched it's theirs. And again, to remind everybody that by 2010, basically China really didn't have a biotech industry. This biotech industry was built, again, from technology from the West, USA, Western Europe, North Asia, although it was a much smaller percentage from North Asia, Japan and Korea, and smaller bits. But again, it helped them produce these vaccines. Now, we didn't put this in here, but this also led to tremendous profitability for Chinese biotech. So the four largest biotech companies, the four largest vaccine companies in China last year produced shareholder returns for their shareholders between January 1 last year and 31st December last year of 30 billion. To vaccinate the world, you need 35 billion. So this became an overnight industry in a year, which China basically is becoming a leader in, which I'll show you in the next couple of pages, producing large amounts of returns. What our paper didn't discuss, and we left it clearly very open because I don't do politics very well, as Hussein knows. I left it open saying this is the amount of money produced by these profits. And if you look forward, this will be even greater going forward because this will be a multi-billion. I think Credit Suisse estimates it's a 20 billion industry. I think that underestimates it because I think COVID or its form or its variants will be around for a number of years. So this could be a multi-20, 30 billion, 40 billion industry. And again, you're looking at probably 10 Western players and probably 15 Chinese players. So after Q4, this is dated as of Q1, who's doing what, where. This is the domestic versus exported. You'll see the numbers, which are pretty clear about how much China is keeping versus how much they're passing along. And you see USA, India, EU, and UK. Again, this is dated as of 21st March. And, this varies daily based upon a number of factors. But I wanted to say also by this time, at the end of March, China was now testing 15. They had 5 approved vaccines. They had testing 15 total vaccines in 12 different countries. So this is how fast this has grown so quickly in again, in 1 quarter, from 2 approved vaccines to 5, and from test of 5 to test of 15. So this is how fast this is growing, and how China has just grasped the nettle. And then finally, to show you, this is just a list of distribution by country. These are 83 countries, various different distributions, which you'll have this. I don't want to go through it with you, but basically China was at the end of March was leading with, I think, 83 countries where there was some either testing or formal partnership. You see donations versus purchase. These are all contracts. I think Soviet Union, Russia was probably at 53 or something like that. So again, you see China and Russia leading the world versus what you see here, with a lot of talk about who's doing what. So I'm going to leave it at that because I know it's tight. Everyone's been listening for 3 hours. I don't want to waste other people's time, but you'll get. I've not shown these slides. I certainly haven't decided to let them go, but I trust you guys. So, and the recipients of this. So, you know, Stephen and Zane, please feel free to share with everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tillman. That was a very important and excellent presentation. Also, Professor Gerace, the role of the economics and the factual nature of what the Belt and Road Cooperation means in reality is an extremely important point that has to continue to be made visible despite the microphones from various disinformation campaigns who do not wish that those kinds of facts and truthful results are being shown. And my point would be that cooperation does not exclude healthy competition. In fact, it generally would mean that healthy competition would be an improvement for all in terms of improving economic conditions as well as cooperation generally. So I think both of your presentations are extremely relevant and important to get out in various aspects, not only here, but in Pakistan and other places where these arguments which are being made that are not based on the reality or the facts will dissolve into smoke, and they should, because they're not based on reality. They're based on the political agendas of certain people. So thank you both. We have another
Stephen, can I raise one more?
now.
May I raise one more point I forgot, which is important? I'm sorry. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, you're welcome. Go right
ahead. I'm very sorry, but it's relevant to Pakistan. So what we talked we rolled it out. China's going to roll this out just like BRI in a series of spoken how we talked about. But to show you how they're going to do this, it's going to be PPP. So the one example in the document, the big document, I don't want to bore you with, it's too big, was Ethiopia, where they have they're manufacturing kits in Ethiopia, joint venture, PPP with local players. They're manufacturing vaccines, Ethiopia, local player, joint venture with Chinese party on a PPP basis, and the same with logistics. Now they've now moved that from Ethiopia in Q4. They've announced it in Q1 UAE, and they announced it 2 weeks ago in Pakistan. So there'll be a series of these regional plays around the world, and Pakistan is one of those 3 that have been named to be the future of this. So again, in a hub to then link it all together along the BRI, although it's much greater than the BRI, to be able to link this information together. Thank you very much, Stephen. I'm sorry I forgot that.
No, thank you for raising that important point as well. And as I say, the facts are that the BRI is conducive for good business, and all of the people who we spoke earlier about the possibilities in Pakistan, the only thing that hinders these kinds of facts, and I think your work is excellent and should continue to be spread in the proper context, as you wish, is to make sure that that these arguments that are often right now quite dirty to try and undermine the facts of how business does improve, we have to just continue to build these types of forums in order to make sure that this reality will continue to reach the great majority of Europeans, as well as, even most importantly, I think it's very important that the United States would have a sufficient access to this type of information. With that said, I want to invite now our third speaker who is from Pakistan, Dr. Maria Sultan, who is the Director General for South Asia Strategic Stability Institute in Islamabad. And I welcome you, Dr. Sultan, and you are welcome to begin your remarks. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for giving me this opportunity. I would also like to echo with my colleagues in thanking not only the Embassy of Pakistan for taking this initiative, but also our partners in Pakistan, especially the Board of Investment, for providing us this opportunity to come together on an issue which has, of course, not only concerns global security debates, but also global economic debates. Well, I would just keep my comments pretty focused in terms of what Belt and Road Initiative actually means for Pakistan, and most importantly, what is the strategic significance of this economic transformation with regards to global supply chains. This is no doubt that it's almost been 9 years since President Xi Jinping proposed the Belt and Road Initiative. It was considered, according to him, what he stressed, that it is initiated by China for jointly building a new world, a new global transformation. And in this global transformation, they believe that the principle for common development through consultation, joint efforts, and shared benefits would perhaps become an achievable reality. So in one way, it is almost as if we are going through a phase where we are not only witnessing what the world had witnessed after the Marshall Plan, but in reality also an altogether perhaps one of the singular biggest outreach, which consists more than 91 countries from land routes and almost 30 plus countries when it comes to the sea routes. And in these sea routes, there is, of course, certain countries which will be playing key role. And in this key role, Pakistan is one of the important countries. So if you would allow me, I'm just going to use a very small presentation, Stephen, and hopefully run it through so that we can, connect on that.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I don't know if you can see the presentation.
Yeah, we can see.
Well, okay. As you can all see, this is a map of the BRI, which is perhaps seen and almost known by almost everyone. But when we look at this map, most of the people think that this is basically about road, railway, and other connectivity, which is going to link the countries together. But it's not just road, railway connectivity, but it is also in terms of a global economic transformation. So if you look at the tail end, if you look at the industrial zones, it's not just connecting to China, but it's in reality connecting to China's industrial zones. So it starts from Beijing, Tianjin, Liaoning, Shanghai, and Guangzhou, and then it leads up to 7 critical countries. As you can see, the other end of the Belt and Road Initiative from the BRI, from the land route point of view, is connecting to 7 major ports. That is the Helsinki port, St. Petersburg, Rotterdam, Calais, and Paris. Then we have Iran, the Khamenei port, and I think what has happened between China and Iran recently in terms of economic cooperation under the CPEC and under the Belt and Road Initiative is quite clear. And then last but not least is the focus for our attention has been Gwadar port. And also linking to that is the importance of Karachi port in terms of the overall initiatives. So if we look at this Belt and Road Initiative and we look at these communications, what we see is that at one end we have got China's industrial zones. On the other hand, we have got the global ports. And then also it is a reverse connectivity in terms of not only opening up the markets, but also accessing these markets from that point of view. Now, if we just look closely at these industrial zones, we see that each one of these industrial zones has got certain specializations. So this means that in future, if we go back and we look at the countries where it's targeted, we will be seeing that some of these countries would be looking at some of this industry from these industrial zones to be shifted ahead. So wherever there is going to be competitive advantage, some of these companies would be shifting ahead. I think Henry had talked about Ethiopia, he's talked about Pakistan. One of the key reasons for this is also in terms of China's greater plan has been in terms of how important these global ports will be playing. The bigger question has been for all people has been why Pakistan has been given so much focus, and what is the importance of Pakistan? Is it just because it's the shortest route? Is it because that we have got one of the bigger ports, or is there is something else to it? I think one of the major reasons which has come forward has been the importance of the global containers and how the containers have shifted and how global ports have played a major role. In this context, from the 1970s, we see Europe and we see United States and we see some
Hello?
part of 80s, what we see is that this port connection sees the emergence of mega ports. We see Rotterdam emerging, we see in China, Shanghai, and we also see New York also developing. But at the same time, we also see something very interesting, and that is Singapore developing as a mega port. In the 1990s, this seems to have further sharpened in terms of global supply chain, which ports could be more efficient, and the mega ports, we see these major ports emerging as key players. So while other ports did play a major role, we see these mega ports dominated. As of now, in 2006 data, this is the global trade volume, which is passing from the Indo-Pacific region, in particular from Pakistan. We can see that there has been almost a 293% increase in global trade volume, which is now passing. So there seems to be a major shift of trade, which was first transatlantic. Now it seems to be more Euro-Asian. So as Europe and Asia will be coming together, it would also be linking together not only the Northern region, but it would be pretty much linking together Asia, Africa, and Europe together. So this means the shared destiny for the future will be between these three regions. And wherever these three regions will move, will be pretty much the defining element in terms of how global trade volume and global economic transformation would be led by which partner. Now, this brings us to the significance of the ports. As you can see, these are the 13 major ports. And as you can see that Singapore is 471 million tons. That is almost 30 years of investment in Singapore as a global trade shipping point. And Gwadar port is 400 million tons unused as of now yet. And if it is going to be optimized, it is going to be almost 800 million tons. And this would, of course, bring us in close competitive advantage and also in certain competition between some of our partners. That means some countries from, say, Dubai, maybe others would be playing a major role. And as we can see here in Dubai also, we have got Oman and Duqm almost competing for the same shared presence. So it is in the significance of this and the future of the world trade, depending upon who will dominate the new global commons, that is going to be shaping this. That means how the outer space common will be shared, how the atmosphere common will be developed, what would be the maritime commons, and now with e-commerce becoming a major factor, what will be the factors for that. This is an actual visualization of the transport clusters, which is at the moment in movement. And as you can see that Europe seems to be at the heart of it. Then we see United States and North America playing a major role. And then of course, China or Shanghai being a major role. Here we also see Dubai emerging as a route. And this route indicated also how the global trade flows were supplemented in terms of global economic financial flows, almost showing the same pattern. What is missing over here is not in terms of how the global trade has happened over the last 30 years or more in this direction, but it is the missing factor from Central Asia to Pakistan, from Pakistan like Asia, South Asia, and from South Asia to Africa, where the youth population budget is and where these other factors will be. This is the cyberspace common, and as you can see here also, most of the connectivity is from the sea lines of communication, and in these sea lines of communication also there are major entry points. Pakistan being one, Iran being second, third is of course India, fourth is Ethiopia, and then we have got Egypt, and then we have got Sudan. And we see that parallel initiatives are being launched in Egypt and Sudan by both United States and China. And then we also see Djibouti emerging as a major point. So what we're looking at is pretty much the belt from Gwadar onwards till the Suez Canal, which is going to be very important in terms of how global trade flows will be following. This is the cyber common. This is the new digital Silk Route, which is being proposed. And as you can see, it goes from Gwadar to Djibouti and from Djibouti to Mombasa on one route. And on the other route, it is going from Pakistan to Djibouti and from Djibouti to Egypt. And the significance of this is not that it's just focused from Pakistan to Djibouti and from Djibouti to Egypt, but the significance is that it then further on connects to Europe. So Europe will be the key connecting point for future in terms of bringing the regions together and bringing the high industry trade together and then linking it to the global supply chain and establishing that pyramid. This is the maritime common, which is indicating the same pattern. And this is actually the oil framework. And as you can see, it is indicating that at this moment, almost 90% of the world oil is passing right in front of Pakistan, 25.5%. And if you see that with regards to United States is almost 2.4% and almost 19.9%, which is passing through the Straits of Malacca. So this is the actual oil which is passing. So this means that if Sweden, Finland, and these countries which have been leaders in mobile technology, as well as also in oil and natural minerals and others, this can be a potential point, not only for entry, but also indicating that how actually the economic transformation is going. So the CPEC component of it, or the land component of connecting to the sea highways, is perhaps the missing chain which China is right now building, and which of course the government of Pakistan, as well as other countries which are key in this economic collaboration, will be facilitating. And once this facilitation is complete, we would be looking at altogether a different picture. Of course, since I come from a security background, it would be not, I would be failing if I do not highlight what have been the impediments which have been created. Some impediments had been, of course, created in terms of in the sea with regards to the anti-piracy operations emerging out of Somalia, and as what's interesting is that in this economic transformation, the partnerships have been very clear. The partnerships have been for United States, it has been pretty much India. So that is where most of the economic investments have gone. Around $60 billion plus dollars have been invested between India and United States. And after the signature of BICA, we're looking at almost a transfer of US IT industry and other industry shifting to India. Then we see Dubai, we see Egypt, which had been the US economic partner, and Pakistan had been also part of the US supply chain, but we were based on the quota system. The difference is that the Chinese, which they're trying to project and which we think is going to be perhaps the gateway, is that they want these joint ventures. And once these joint ventures come in, and if we are able to bring in a strong legislation and we are able to kind of seize on the opportunity of comparative advantage, then the new route would indicate that there would be a new economic configuration emerging. And in that new economic configuration, it would be key, which are going to be the countries which are going to be the key access points. As you can see from this map, also it is Pakistan. Djibouti plays an important role. Then, of course, it is Egypt, and then it goes on to Italy, and then further down to various European partners. Now, this was the anti-piracy operations which had happened before, and this is what Pakistan has done after CPEC. That means clearing these areas from this and reducing the high-risk areas. Now, of course, this brings us to the much debated issue of China-US power competition going on in the region. What has been interesting has been that the movement of the fleets. What we have seen is that the 6th Fleet of the United States has moved down further down. At the choke points, we have seen the 5th Fleet move out from Bahrain and go down to Duqm. The 7th Fleet also coming down and covering the opening and exit points of the Straits of Malacca. So the bigger question has been why? The question has been is based on this data, although this is a little dated, but this shows that the economic trade flows are indicating that there is almost a near equal competition between trans-Pacific trade and Euro-Asian trade. And what's interesting is that transatlantic trade is coming down. What is missing over here is a trade phenomena between the North and South, between Central Asia, Russia, Asia, and Africa. So this means whoever is going to capture this market, whoever is going to have access to this, will be perhaps will be the part of this new framework. This is the CPEC route once again. So if you look at it, then it allows us to connect to these points, and not only to these points, but also to give an understanding that this economic comparative advantage will be based in terms of efficiency gains. So this is the transport efficiency gains. If from Europe to Eastern China, if they come through Gwadar, it's almost 65%, almost 85%. If they come from Gulf to Eastern China, it's 98%. And from Europe to Western China, almost 70%. And from Gulf to Western China, almost 58%, if it is coming through Gwadar. So this means that Pakistan would not only add a lot in terms of this comparative advantage in terms of economic activity, but it will also give us economic boost assumptions, which is that if only 10% of the Chinese trade passes through Pakistan, through CPEC, we're talking about a transport volume of approximately $1 trillion. This means that the GDP would be likely to increase from 1.5% to almost 2.5%. Yes, nobody had predicted the COVID situation, but even then, the fact remains that the opportunity remains very squarely with countries with high population density, and also an annual trade expectation, which is likely to increase to 40%, creating multiple jobs. I'm just going to run through this. Of course, the biggest problem here has been how to attract investors, how to ensure that the FDI remains stable. The presentations what we've heard this morning have tried to show the government of Pakistan's commitment towards it. But what's interesting is it's not just the commitment of government of Pakistan. It is the actual economic gains which anybody will gain as a result of investing in this region. So in short, I'll just like to conclude on the fact that although the demographic diversity is likely to impact on a positive trajectory, the fact that Pakistan has got a high youth factor will increase. These have been some of the early harvest projects which Pakistan had. This is the last project at hand, which is the rail connectivity. Once this is done, we are talking about already completed projects in fiber optics, in oil pipelines, and of course building up of the port facilities. So in short, in terms of actual economic activities, the special economic zones, we've already activated 2 of them. These are the potential 57 SE zones which have been put on the plate. But this shows that just not even going up, even if there's a focus is on the south or in the seas, the potential for cooperation is quite high. So this is, I'm just going to conclude in 1 minute. So these are the next and 11
can somebody
which has been given by World Bank, and it stays in the places Pakistan level. Although despite all of this, what we see and what we understand is that the future of global economic transformation will pass through key countries, and in these key countries, Pakistan will be playing a very important role. But this connectivity would not be possible if we are unable to connect with some of our European partners who have been our economic partners earlier, and who can capitalize on this incentive. This would also also mean that the global economic focus for the future will move away from transatlantic, will move away from that and come down to Euro-Asian connectivity. These are some of the sectors which can be potential cooperation between regions and between countries which are invested in the Belt and Road Initiative, and hopefully will become gateways for economic and global transformation. I thank you all for your patience, and I hope that if there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them during the question answer session, or if there's something raised during the chat. So thank you so much, Stephen, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sultan. I think you made a very thorough picture of what the possibilities are. I want to thank you for that. And I also think you made two very useful and very important points that were three at least that I think I would just highlight, that Asia is emerging as a world economic power. And this is a process that in reality cannot be stopped and shouldn't be stopped, because it leads to the ultimate benefit and development of a often what is referred to as a multipolar world, but it means the general benefit of humanity. The other point that I think was very important and is not generally clearly understood, but was highlighted in this webinar, both on the Pakistan sector in which you took up, is these connections, transport are not simply rails or roads. They are development corridors which define the basis for how one actually invests in around these corridors for economic industrial modernization, which is precisely the manner in which poverty will be eliminated. The only thing that would prevent this is the unfortunate Hobbesian view that this is a jungle in which everybody has to protect their own interests against everyone else's. And that is a very dangerous perspective that is unfortunately way too dominant in the political arena. But most human beings who understand that their fellow human beings are maybe competitors, but not enemies, would understand that that perspective is of no use for the future advancement of humanity. So thank you again, Dr. Sultan, and I will now turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Hussein Askari, who will elaborate some of the other aspects of the Belt and Road. Thank you. You're welcome, Mr. Askari.
Thank you, Stephen. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, I'm very happy to participate in this very successful webinar. I can say I congratulate our friends in the Pakistani Embassy, Ambassador Zahur Ahmad, and Trade Counselor, Mr. Mustafa Ghulam. I have also, I would thank all the speakers in the previous panel for enlightening us on all the potential that exists in Pakistan, but also the other speakers in this current panel. This is enormous wealth of knowledge. I'm going to talk about certain ironies which Professor Geraci hinted at. Is that, you know, the question of the conflict between the political and the economic, because there are many ironies when it comes to the political talk, and therefore that's it's preferable for certain circles to use the political talk rather than the economic talk, because the economic talk will quickly collapse all the narratives about the Belt and Road and China. So I would just read from my presentation just to save time. I'd say there is no doubt, which is, I mean, my presentation is, as you see in the map behind me, that we have actually a global possibility for cooperation among all nations presented by the BRI. This is not a Chinese or Asian phenomena, but it could become an international cooperation framework. Now, everybody knows that the COVID-19 pandemic is is the greatest threat and crisis facing world today. Reports of continued and sometimes unprecedented spread of the virus, such as in India and Brazil, for example, and the incredible loss of life and livelihood in many parts of the world are everywhere to be seen by people. However, a parallel and unfortunate development is escalating in the form of tension between the United States, NATO, EU alliance with both Russia and China, and it is reaching a very dangerous level, as my colleague Stephen explained. What this shows is that the list of priorities for policymakers in many powerful nations are somehow confused and misguided. Many nations are left fighting alone against the pandemic with no real resources. This creates new strains of the virus that can come back and hit even the nations that have managed to control it or are mass vaccinating. These vaccines might become inefficient in the face of new strains. So, as the saying goes, nobody is safe before everybody is safe. Vaccine nationalism and chaotic panic-driven measures are making an international joint effort to fight the virus and secure the world against it very hard task to accomplish. At the same time, a military escalation is brewing in the East Front between NATO and Russia and between the United States and its allies against China. Now, I would just the hypothetical question, if we had aliens coming from a distant galaxy to Earth in last year, 2020, and observed that the pandemic had caused the global economy to shrink by 4.4% in terms of gross domestic product. The number of people in extreme food insecurity reaching 350 million people, and supply chains collapsing. But those aliens see at the same time that world governments spending 2.4% of the global GDP on military expenditure. Now, what would they think about humans? Of course, they would say that we are becoming insane. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, CPRI, just published a report. I'm sharing just want to share with you my slides. Just trying to get the slideshow. All right, I guess you can see it now. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, CPRI, reported in its latest study, published just last week, that in 2020, military expenditure reached a historical level close to $2 trillion US. Of course, the United States is leading the pack with $790 billion on military spending, but other nations, including China and other EU and NATO countries, are also spending. Now, imagine what we can do with $2 trillion a year of invested in transport, water, power, healthcare, education, and scientific research globally. On April 22, and I'm going to go through a few of the ironies of the political situation, then we'll go to the economic aspect of things. On April 22, the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee passed a bipartisan resolution called the Strategic Competition Act of 2021. That's, of course, competing with China's Belt and Road Initiative. It proposes to allocate $300 million annually to do what? Build railways, build power plants, hospitals and schools in Africa and Asia? No. Much of this money will be spent to finance so-called independent media and third-party civil organizations, that is in countries around the world, to discredit the Belt and Road Initiative. The legislation also calls on the Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor to work with the US Agency for International Development, USAID, to support and train journalists in other countries on investigative techniques necessary to ensure public accountability related to the Belt and Road Initiative. So they pay and train people in other countries to create fake news about the BRI, such as the discredited death trap narrative. Now, if you want to beat China and the Belt and Road Initiative, shouldn't you be competing to build better and cheaper railways in Africa, or more efficient power plants and water management systems, or build better schools and hospitals than the Chinese do? Last year, the Chinese President Xi Jinping said that China and the United States should be competing like two sprinters on the track, not like two boxers in a ring, trying to undermine each other. Now, the US and the EU have made many initiatives to beat the BRI. That's the declared intention, but none of them materialized, and some of them have even become comic in nature. We had first the EU-Asia Connectivity Initiative in 2018. Now, that didn't really end so well. And also, it turned out that this EU-Asia Connectivity Strategy is simply a two-page slideshow, as you can see here. This is the first page. Now, what is comic about this EU strategy for connectivity with Asia, it ignored the existence of a tiny little banana republic in Asia called China. There is no mention of China in this strategy at all. Probably because they think that China is not such a significant economic power, or there's no understanding of what is going on, or that this really the EU-China, the EU-Asia connectivity strategy is not a strategy. Now, the Swedish Institute for European Studies, Policy Studies, spent 80 pages. They wrote a report with two authors, Svante Cornell and Niklas Svanström. They tried to figure out the content in these 2 pages of the EU strategy to finally come out with the conclusion that the best strategy for the EU would be geopolitical, i.e. trying to manipulate Russia and China to work against each other in Asia. Now, of course, that's not going to happen. And that's not really the right strategy to do things in Asia. Now, we had also the Japan-India, just another example, so-called Japan-India backed Asia-Africa Growth Corridor in 2018. That is that China and India jointly will invest in infrastructure in Africa. Now, what this whole discussion ended up becoming is just a website that has not been updated since January 2018. Now, the Trump administration also had its Prosper Africa, which it launched in 2018 by then National Security Advisor John Bolton. The initiative, he said, Bolton, would foster US investment, expand Africa's middle class, and enhance business climate across the region. He also said it would help to counter predatory financial and political efforts by Russia and China in Africa. Now, the Trump administration did not put its money where its mouth was, and the initiative is gone now. The Biden administration is merely warning African nations against working with the non-transparent China. Well, thank you for the advice. That's all these initiatives can offer Africa and the rest of the world, which is just simply words. It's not backed by any serious projects, financing, real construction of these projects. Now, what is wrong with these initiatives is that, and why they fail, it's because first, they are not connected to the reality of the world. and what people around the world need and aspire to achieve. Second, they are merely designated as a political and media gimmick to encounter China and the Belt and Road Initiative without backing them with any substantial investments or serious alternatives. Therefore, the more the opposition to the BRI and China grows among politicians, think tanks, and media in the West who try to tarnish China and the BRI, the more nations are attracted to joining it. That's a bit ironical, isn't it? Up to now, 140 nations have joined the BRI, many of them after 2017. 140 nations out of 190 is not a bad certificate of success for the BRI. Now, the opposition to China and the BRI is generally based on the notion of geopolitics, a zero-sum game, where the winner takes it all and the loser is destroyed. Win-win cooperation is considered naive and misleading. It is this geopolitical thinking that has brought us to the brink of not only a new Cold War in the world, but a potential hot war, in which there will be no winners because civilization itself will be erased. Now we go to the second part, which is more interesting for us and for this webinar, which is our serious business. Now, if we manage to brush aside all these false and inhuman notions of the law of the jungle and deal with each other as humans with universal rights and aspirations, with equality among nations, there is a way out of this crisis. Our Belt and Road Institute in Sweden has worked tirelessly and will continue to do so to explain why it is more beneficial for Sweden, Europe, and the United States to work together with China and even Russia than work against them. We also have explained that the Belt and Road Initiative is a suitable platform for the major powers to get together to deal with the most pressing matters of the world, including the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have produced and will continue to produce podcasts, reports, and convene webinars and hopefully seminars soon when the restrictions are lifted to bring together experts and leaders to discuss these matters. In our podcasts, series so far, we dealt with many matters that are worthwhile to consider in the context of the East-West cooperation, which we are proposing. And just go back to my slideshow. We started our podcast series with the discussion about the comprehensive agreement on investment between China and the EU. We had a discussion on Sri Lanka, another podcast. We had the Maritime Silk Road discussion with Professor Griffiths from Holland. We had also a very fascinating discussion about the rail freight transport with a representative of the rail freight in Holland, Mrs. Hui-Lin Shi. We have also a discussion about the Space Silk Road with a historian of space exploration. And this also shows in a fantastic way why nations have to, it's not like a choice, they have to work in space together if humanity is gonna progress in that field. And by the way, China is sending to establish its space station in this coming week, and it will become a replacement somehow of the International Space Station, which will be decommissioned this year. And China will be probably the host for all kinds of astronauts from the United States, Russia, Europe, and other nations. We also had a very interesting webinar on debunking the China debt trap, which is now discredited. We had on the Green Belt and Road with the former Environment Minister of Norway, Mr. Erik Solheim. We had a webinar on, or a podcast on the Health Silk Road, which I will stop here to conclude my presentation because there are many interesting things, and Mr. Henry Tillman have discussed these matters with the real numbers. But the Health Silk Road is very important to understand certain aspects of the Belt and Road Initiative. The health super, of course, was an initiative in 2017, which I will come to soon. But I just want to say that, as everybody knows, that China managed in record time last year, as Mr. Henry Tillman said, in about 2 months to control the COVID-19 pandemic at home, and then quickly mobilized to help other nations with the materials and medicines and now vaccines. Now, China's ability to manage such phenomenal achievement hinges on 2 aspects. 1, its organizational socio-political skills, and 2, infrastructural and industrial capacity. Now, I will deal with the latter one on the infrastructure industry, since different countries have different political, social, and cultural and historical structures that cannot be generalized or copied by other nations. The fact that there is a direct correlation between the availability of modern and solid infrastructure, that's transport, water, power, telecommunications, and the ability to provide healthcare for the population in any country was emphasized in a detailed study published by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, in March 2020, and entitled "The Impact of the Coronavirus, COVID-19 and its Implications for Infrastructure Priorities." Now, the AIIB researchers correctly pointed to the importance of infrastructure for providing a good level of healthcare for populations, urging to redefine the priorities for infrastructure development projects by governments. It also pledged to support such priorities financially. The AIIB, which is one of the key global financial institutions that emerged in the wake of the Belt and Road Initiative and is based in Beijing with a capital of $100 billion, has up to now 100 member nations, including many European countries and Sweden, of course. The report states that this, quote, "the disruption brought about by the COVID-19 also highlight the importance of sustainable and resilient infrastructure. Firstly, developing economies will need to increase investments in healthcare and public health infrastructure. This is especially crucial in the context of megatrends such as urbanization and increased trade connectivity. Without proper public health infrastructure such as clean water and sanitation, developing economies will remain vulnerable to such outbreaks. A country's readiness to cope with epidemics is correlated with its quality of infrastructure. Infrastructure development is a key part of health security and epidemic preparedness," end of quote. It also noted in a press release published on March 25 that recognizing that countries with fragile infrastructure have less capacity to handle health crises, the AIIB is working to scale up infrastructure investment, including in public health, healthcare, and for information and communication technologies, to better serve members impacted by the COVID-19. Now, this is not a new idea. This was the norm in the post-World War II era of reconstruction in many parts of the world, especially in Europe and the United States. In the United States, a model based on the congressional law called the Hill-Burton Free and Reduced Cost Act in 1964 stipulated that the standard for a modern public healthcare system should be the provision of 4.5 hospital beds per 1,000 people. Today, the beds available per 1,000 people in the United States have fallen to 2.9, according to the World Bank. Russia stands at 8.2 beds per 1,000 and China at 4.2 beds. However, what the World Bank list also shows is the disastrous conditions in many countries in the world, especially in Africa, where public health facilities are way below anything that can cope with the serious outbreak of the corona pandemic or any other epidemic or pandemic. Now, here is a sample of hospital beds available in African countries As we said, the standard is 4.5 beds per 1,000 people. So you can compare. We added a column for electricity consumption in kilowatt hour per person per year in these countries for purpose of determining the requirements for having such hospital availability later. The reason should be obvious. Since hospitals cannot exist in a void without electricity, nor without clean water, transport, telecommunications, or skilled workforce, of course, you cannot have any real healthcare. Now, to compare these numbers of the available electricity, in Sweden, for example, we have the number is 13,000 kilowatt hour compared to these African countries. To bring Africa to the same Hill-Burton standard of public healthcare, it can be estimated that the continent would need at least 15,000 new modern hospitals constructed, containing 4 million new hospital beds. Now, to understand the physical requirements for building a modern healthcare system, we take one well-documented example. That's the US, from the US Energy Information Administration, which was it issued a report in 2007, where it discusses how much electricity, power, and clean water you need to have modern hospitals. And they studied the 3,000 biggest hospitals in the United States. And without going through all the numbers, what this shows that for Africa, that for the 15,000 new African hospitals, they would require approximately 25,000 megawatts of new power, electric power generated, and 3.5 billion cubic meters of clean water just for the hospitals. Now, the reason I'm going through all these details is to make it clear that providing healthcare for African continent is not about donating 100 Swedish kroner or a US dollar every month to some NGO. You cannot have modern healthcare without infrastructure, electricity, clean water, transport, and education. So that brings us to this whole idea of the Health Silk Road. As you know, President Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road in 2013, but in 2015, the Chinese Development and Reform Commission issued the Vision and Action on Jointly Building Belt and Road, in which it very clearly discusses the importance of building a healthy Silk Road and investment in these roads. Now, I will just, to go to the conclusion, there was a very important conference in 2017, and in which the World Health Organization signed the Belt and Road Memorandum with China. In that conference, which was called Belt and Road High-Level Meeting for Health Cooperation towards a Health Silk Road. That was the official creation of the Health Silk Road. It was in August 18, 2017. And at the end of that conference, 64 nations signed the Health Silk Road Communique. Now, in his address to the conference, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said, quote, "As you know, the world faces increasing and more complex epidemics, pandemics, and disasters. Not only are these events more likely to occur, they are also likely to have a bigger impact on human health, the social fabric, security, and the economy." He continued to say that President Xi's proposal for a Health Silk Road, which strengthens and renews ancient links between cultures and peoples with health at its core, is indeed visionary. Now, Tedros said, he pointed to the important point I'm trying to raise, is the connection between the Belt and Road and the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 3, which is about healthcare. The WHO director said the Belt and Road Initiative contains the fundamentals to achieve universal health coverage. Infrastructure, that's infrastructure, access to medicines, human resources, and a platform to share experience and promote best practices. China has much to teach us about these issues. It is a world leader in disease surveillance and outbreak control, and was one of the first countries to step in during the Ebola outbreak, end of quote. In conclusion, Tedros said, we should build upon these experiences. Let us the health leaders of the 60 countries gathered here and public health partners build a healthy Silk Road together. Now, in conclusion, I would like to say today, more urgently than ever, the Health Silk Road and the BRI are offering a platform of cooperation between all nations. The BRI should no longer be considered a Chinese project. It is an all-inclusive mode of peaceful cooperation among all nations. The world does not need more weapons. It does not need more fake news and mass media and think tanks. It needs serious efforts to achieve peace and understanding among nations through economic cooperation and economic development. Thank you for your patience. That's what I had to say.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Askari. I will open it soon here for questions and comments. I would just say that we have had two excellent presentations by two, actually I didn't know, but both Professor Geraci and Mr. Tillman have both been bankers who know the economic facts and have presented a good deal of them today. We have had a spokesman from Pakistan who I understand was actually also a security expert. And perhaps one could say that the best security is economic cooperation, not how you can confront your enemy with military hardware. But the main point here is that this has been a very successful webinar roadshow documenting how economic cooperation, specifically in Pakistan, could work, and how the Belt and Road can be a forum for global economic development. And we have demonstrated in substance the points and the arguments that are valid. We will, as my colleague also said, we will continue to raise these forums together with our friends from Pakistan, from China, from perhaps some of the other embassies, other countries who are open to discussing the substance of the importance of this type of global cooperation. I would say that for those who are arguing so vociferously against China and perhaps others in the name of democracy, that they will provide a transparent forum for us to be able to present these relevant points to the population of Sweden, of Norway, of Finland, and population of Britain and Italy, as well as the United States. In fact, I would maybe even propose that we are going to, or I might be a part of setting up a Belt and Road Institute in the United States, because apparently the US Senate has decided to donate a lot of money, as Mr. Askari said, to misrepresent the Belt and Road Initiative. So we have on our side, we have the possibility of defending our point of view with the substances, and we are willing to have any kind of open dialogue and discussion with any major media, provided it's a live program where we can be sure that we are not being misquoted, or with relevant institutions, because these, and I would say that the participants in this particular forum would be very welcome from my standpoint in further participation in this context, because we are not stopping here. we are going to go forward with these ideas until, in my view, we have succeeded in bringing the rest of the world into an understanding of the benefits of the Belt and Road and what it means for development. So with that said, I will open, I think we have Michelle Rasmussen, who has put up her hand. I think there could be others. I believe that there are some people who have asked me to ask questions on the chat. So I will have to look through those, but Mrs. Rasmussen, would you like to speak? You're welcome.
Yes, hello. Thank you so much for a wonderful webinar. Both parts have been very inspiring. And I am the vice president of the Schiller Institute in Denmark. And I would like to invite all of the participants to attend a webinar which will occur on May 8th, sponsored by the International Schiller Institute, called The Moral Collapse of the Transatlantic World Cries Out for a New Paradigm. It will start at 1500 hours Central European time. And the Schiller Institute has been involved in promoting the idea with the leadership of Lyndon LaRouche and Helga Zepp-LaRouche for the ideas that became, many of the ideas that then became the Belt and Road Initiative and the idea of a world land bridge. And the idea of the webinar will be, instead of having a policy of sanctions, for example, against Yemen and Syria, and that type of foreign policy, to really promote the win-win cooperation for economic development between all of the countries of the world as a way of getting not only development, but world peace. So I just invite the participants to attend this webinar. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Rasmussen. Do we have other questions regarding the subject matter of the presentations by Professor Geraci and Mr. Tillman, and as well as Mr. Askari? I wanted to check. I think there might have been a question that was put on the yes, here is one from for Mr. Geraci. I have a question for Michele. If I cannot be there for the question and answer, I don't know. Well, Mr. Chilani, it looks like you are present. Maybe you want to ask it yourself. You're not, you're muted, but perhaps if you're not there, I will ask it for you. The question is, how can Italy contribute to the BRI project in Pakistan? I'm thinking at investments in the textile industry and energy, for instance, but certainly you have a better knowledge and recommendations. Secondly, you have always stressed the importance of cooperation between Italy and China in third countries, specifically Africa. Can you elaborate on that? So, Professor Geraci, are you with us, I hope? Hello, Professor? Well, it doesn't seem that he is perhaps at the moment there. I have not seen if there are other questions.
Stephen, I have a small remark to make in
Stephen,
terms of.
hello. Sorry. Hi, Stephen. I'm back.
Oh, you're back, Professor. Okay, very good. Did you hear the question?
Yes, I heard the question and the.
You have to unmute. Professor?
The question was from Mr. Celani on regarding the Belt and Road use of cooperation in third countries, right?
Yes, and also if you could elaborate on the work that you have done in regards to specifically Africa.
The question, no, thank you. I thank Claudio for Mr. Celani for the question. The question is very pertinent because one thing that is always misunderstood is that the purpose of the Belt and Road is not just to have operation and development in the countries that signed the MOU, so Italy and or China. So it is not just about Chinese investment in Italy, but it's also about common investment into the regions of the Belt and Road, which pretty much means every Asian and every African country at least, and then also parts of Europe. So the cooperation is indeed needed in Africa. If you recall at the beginning, I said that the economic and the ethic drive for the development. In Africa, we do have both. I think we do have to make sure that Africa develops in a sustainable way. This is not just because we are nice and we want the African people to have the future that they deserve, but it is also because this is a new market and an opportunity. So the cooperation in third country, specifically in Africa or even in Pakistan and other countries of Asia, is really, from my point of view, a need, a must do for Europe that is the continent that will have the lowest growth rate in the whole world. And so we need to find new markets. And these markets are in Asia, in Central Asia, and also in Africa. Now, the way to do it is, like, for example, we're trying to analyze the complementary skills of Chinese and, for example, Italian companies that have in certain sectors like agricultural development, machinery, or infrastructure and construction, where Italian companies are very good in construction. If I may say, they are better when they do things outside of Italy than when they build roads in Italy. And Chinese companies are good, but they also need a little bit maybe of a European or Western partner for issues related to image, branding, soft power. And in a way, and this is my advice that I also give to our Chinese friends, when you go in a joint operation with a Western partner, it dilutes all the possible criticism. I think, Stephen, you have invited your American co-citizen to also join the Belt and Road, because this is really what we would like to see. In Japan, of course, you know, once we had a project, it's in Pakistan, between Italy, China, US, and Japan, and we can do it in Pakistan, we can do it in India, and I know there are very big differences, and we do stuff in India, for example, but if we have a joint ownership of the project, it's not just China, I think all the criticism will be dissipated. Now, imagine if the problem of Sri Lanka or some debt trap in Montenegro, if it were not just China, but let's assume it were Italy, China, US jointly doing a project in Montenegro that may have had problems. Let's assume it would be had been the same in Sri Lanka or in Malaysia and other countries. All the criticism towards China would immediately disappear because it would be a criticism against ourselves. And that's why I said that the political argument would then be completely devoid of any substance. We will go back to economics, the numbers on which we can solve the problem. So not only is a need for the investing countries that we gain benefit from investing in countries that have a higher GDP growth, but it's also a key benefit for China to dilute its presence and so make it less and less, let's say, more immune to criticism. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor. That is exactly the pathway to the future, that when the majority of the world and the largest economic powers as Japan, as the United States, would understand the benefits for themselves and the rest of the world, then these type of arrangements can be consolidated and should be consolidated. And I think that that's a very important point, that this is not a, as it is being turned into in many incorrect and false arguments, that this is simply an initiative or it's an operation only from China. It is a gateway for all nations, and what you have just outlined in terms of the potential development in Asia and in Africa, which by the way has the largest youth population in the world. And if you look at human beings as an asset for development, that is the human creative spirit and the mind as an asset for economic development rather than as a burden, then you see that the potential for that kind of joint operations between Italy and Africa and will only develop very rapidly. So are there other questions or comments?
I think there was a comment from my friend, the co-speaker, Henry Tillman, about the US investments in Africa, because it's true. He says that yesterday Total suspended its LNG project in Mozambique due to threats from ISIS, the terrorist group. This was USA's first BRI loan for $5 billion. $1 billion from the UK, and I think the rest by the US Exim Bank. It's true that the Trump administration reactivated the US Exim Bank to give loans to projects in Africa. Obama had suspended that, funny enough, doing a big service to Africa. But almost all American and British investments and French investments in Africa are in the extraction sector, like this one you mentioned in Mozambique. It's a huge natural gas extraction project. So, and the United States and Britain have invested more than China in Africa, actually, historically. I think just recently, China surpassed the United States and Britain as the biggest investor in Africa, but there's a big qualitative difference in the Chinese investments, which are diversified because most of it is in infrastructure. The 1/3 is about in manufacturing, and then 1/3 in extraction, raw materials. But if you look at the US and British investments, they are in two sectors. The majority is in extraction, raw materials, just taking wealth from Africa, and the rest is in the financial services, which is also taking wealth out of Africa. But they are building nothing which benefits the nations of Africa in terms of transport, water, power, healthcare, and so on and so forth. So there's a qualitative difference between the Chinese investments and US, British, and French investments in Africa.
If I could also comment, Hussein, the reason I put that in there, I thought to make everyone chuckle a bit, because you did such a good job of making me chuckle about 30 minutes ago. So number one, I'm a banker for 30 years. I've been on credit committees at 3 of the world's largest banks. And we always laugh that the last one in is the worst credit possible. So this is the US Exim, on their first move to become their new BRI platform, is a $5 billion into a land filled with ISIS jihadists. And it was, and to be blunt, I'm also an advisor, as I mentioned. One of my board members is a very senior energy advisor to many governments. So China walked from this investment years ago. Trump plowed $5 billion into it, dragged the US and Japan into it, and now you've got a huge mess with ISIS. So it's easy to say there's so many things wrong with the BRI. His first move into his way to compete and boasting, I've competed with China and beat them, look what happened. So that's why I wanted to share this story with everyone. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Henry. That was very good.
It was very useful. Thank you, Mr. Tillman. I think that there's also one important point which is implicit but should be emphasized, that Western investment, as my colleague said, in Africa, going even back to the worst days of colonialism, has always been how they can pull out raw materials and thereby trying to define the idea of economic well-being in terms of raw material wealth. Now, raw materials are very useful and they should be used in the context of development, but they do not constitute the essence of economic wealth. That is defined by the power of the human productivity and through human creative thinking, that is through technologies that are advancing the benefits of the populations, not simply how you're pumping oil or other things which you can then sell for major profit. Profit is not bad if it's something that is done in the context of what also serves the common interests of the people in the nation. So I just add that in light of the fact that the history of the US and Britain in Africa has not been, or IMF, World Bank, has not been investment in major modern infrastructure or modernization. And that's what must change. And the Belt and Road is the vehicle that could provide the platform for that. And would most definitely love to see the United States join hands with China to do those kinds of joint projects. I would. Thank you.
Stephen, can I give you one good thing to finish this for you for the day? Last year, of all the investments that went into that China made in healthcare, despite all the noise you saw, the #1 location for all Chinese investments in healthcare last year was into the USA. And the #1 investment last year of companies investing, funds investing in China came from the USA. So forget all the noise and the 300 million. The actual answer is there are real funds flowing, there's real technology flowing, and it works at the operating level. That said, much lower levels. Below the parapet, no one's put their hand up and said we might want to make an issue, but it still all works. So as you venture into the USA, there's still a lot of flow happening.
Well, that's good. That's good. Good contribution. I agree with you. The economic side of things can work and should work in that precisely those kinds of directions. And it is definitely the case that China has been a #1 provider, even to the US military, of health services. So besides the noise and the ideology, there is that reality. And that's my point in why we want to spread the benefits of this kind of webinar and forum to give that knowledge to people in general who are often being misled and manipulated by information that is not truthful.
Stephen, I have a small comment to make based on our experience in Pakistan. Can I state that?
You're most welcome.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, about my friend Askari mentioned about the narrative and the battle of narrative. We went through this since its inception in 2013 till to date, and but what I see now is based on my own literature review and based on my experience in CPEC. I think the narrative of debt trap, and here we had the East India Company's narrative again and again repeatedly highlighted, and comparing Hamban Tuta with Gwadar. I think that has outlived its life based on the fact that the action on ground was significant and it was able to demonstrate the socio-economic change that was happening. The other thing with respect to learning from African model, in 2017, when we were preparing our long-term plan for CPEC, what we did was that we invited Professor Lin Yifu from China, and based on his structural economics research on Ethiopia and his work on the investment flow from China to Ethiopia, we learned was that in Pakistan, in our SEZs, our first investment attraction should be on labor-intensive industries, because the level of training and vocational exercise is much lesser as compared to high-tech industries. So for that, we went again and again. We learned from Laos and Cambodia also. So I think the integration, not just of the infrastructure, but also of knowledge sharing, helped us, a country like Pakistan, to develop and be ahead of others in terms of CPEC in comparison to all the other 6 corridors.
Great, thank you. Do we have others who have questions or comments of relevance to hopefully what the speakers have outlined? I just want to again emphasize that all of our speakers, but Mr. Tillman and Professor Gerace were very, very important in outlining the on-the-ground facts of how the economic processes are working. And this is a very important element of meeting these kinds of misrepresentations, like the debt trap that my colleague had tackled, and Mr. Askari had tackled in an earlier point. So that's, I think, it's an important pathway for the future of these kinds of exchanges. Yes, I see that we have a person, Gui Hina Shah, will like to say something. I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name too badly.
No worries. Thank you very much. I think I have more of a comment rather than a question. So I'm Gule Hina Shah Saad, and I'm from Pakistan, and I'm doing my PhD actually in political science at the University of Milan in Italy. And currently I'm based in the Netherlands. So I'm really happy to be kind of like attending this in an environment where we have speakers from the diplomatic side and also the scholars, and covering a lot of variety of the Belt and Road investments. And I'm currently studying that in terms of my doctorate. So looking at the Chinese investment in Asia and looking at also the governance impact. So I'm looking at empirical data. And when it comes to the Chinese investments in different countries, the problem often we face is in terms of how to identify the Chinese investments. So is it a Chinese FDI going to the countries, or is it some part of grant and loan? Of course, in the case of Pakistan, we see a different composition. So some part is dedicated as a grant component, some is dedicated as a loan part. So just, I think when we look at the Belt and Road investments overall, if you have some resources on categorization of these various Chinese investments, I think that would be a really good step to kind of elaborate further on that and build up on the research on the BRI. Thank you.
Can I address that, because that's what I do for a living?
Yes, you're welcome.
And I just was able to survive varying MOFCOM format. It took me years to vary it. So MOFCOM and WIND, which is their Bloomberg, only does FDI, and only upon closing, and only on outbound. So it's outbound. Once it gets to Hong Kong, it's outbound. So once once it's going to outbound, China's outbound. Sorry, Hong Kong. It's outbound, number one. Number two, they only do FDI. They don't go below FDI. And number three, they don't do it till it closes, right? We don't do that because we live in the West. We do it upon announcement. Yes, upon announcement, outbound announcement, because by law, it's an announcement, number one. Number two, we go below FDI because the Chinese learned years ago the regulators are going to start looking at 10% or more stakes. So now they're doing roughly 50% of their investments below 10%. So it's growth capital, so they're not being slowed. Now, most places, accountancy firms, McKinsey don't do that. We are the only one. We and Dealogic are the only ones who do that. So and also the FT has a below FDI threshold too. So the answer to your question is all of those are counted as above. So it's policy loans, yes, and you can get that information from SAIS carry or from ourselves, which is ChinaInvestmentResearch.org. But none of us actually, we have the amount of loans granted, we have the amount of loans ultimately done, but none of us have the flow per month or per quarter, because that's only private information from the Chinese government. So nobody has that data. If they do, it's a problem. So you can get the overall amount, and you get the amount done at the end of the time. You can't get monthly payments or quarterly payments. It's against the law. So you can get the policy loans. You can get bank loans from any of the bank providers, Bloomberg, et cetera. You get announced through us. You can get closed through MOFCOM. That's FDI only. They have to go one step below to get below FDI. And how do I know this? Because I've been negotiating with MOFCOM for 3 years to finally get them to accept the methodology, because they don't do that.
Thank you, Henry. I just missed one of the slides I wanted to show was our podcast on the sorry. We had one important podcast in our series on the the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor with Mr. Shakil Ahmed Ramai, who's one of the great experts in Pakistan on China-Pakistan cooperation. And there in this podcast, which you can find on our website, he actually breaks down the different for the first and second phase, but mostly the first phase. What is the foreign direct investment by China, which is the majority of the projects, and what is loans and what is grants. So if you have time, check on our website and look for this podcast.
Yes, you raised an excellent point. In the last few months, there's been much more disclosure from Pakistan and from the Chinese government on what's actually been distributed as well. And the same is true with Kazakhstan. So you can now get almost all data from Kazakhstan, which was 31 billion. So you could get and the BRI project. So for many years, they didn't disclose what's been released. And now two of the biggest countries in the world, both Pakistan and Kazakhstan, which are the biggest, two of the biggest countries in the BRI in terms of numbers, you can now get good data from the government released by China. They have been sitting on this for years before they finally released it. It's always a challenge. That's how I know it so well. I do this every day for a living since 2008.
Thank you for that. Something more? You still have your hand up, Miss Guina. You help me with your pronunciation.
Yeah, you can call me Gul, the first part of the name. That's
it's Gul. It's not Gui. Okay.
G-U-L. Yeah,
Gul.
I think it's just stayed up from before, but yeah, thank you very much. I'll look into that as well further. And I think I can also say that here I'm based at the International Institute for Asian Studies at Leiden University. So I would be more than happy to kind of coordinate in terms of further webinars, do a collaborative conference or something. Please feel free to reach out. I can put my email in the chat, and I will be working on this project for the upcoming years. So I'm looking at Asia primarily, but also plan to do that African cases on the Chinese loan data with the SASCARI that you mentioned, Henry. So yeah, that's maybe an additional comment to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We look forward to cooperating with you. Yeah, do we have any more questions or comments at this time? For any of the panelists, Institute in Sweden will be planning a a new or is planning a new webinar or roadshow type of webinar in the fall, in September, and it will most likely focus very much on what we would call the green belt and road, how those kinds of questions, which are very much on the international agenda, can also be addressed. So I would welcome everybody to join us in these exchanges in the future. I would thank Commercial Counselor Mustafa, the Embassy of Pakistan, Commercial Counselor Han from the Embassy in China, the Ambassador, His Excellency Gui Gungyu, and everyone from the Board of Investments and the various inputs that we have had during both the first and the second session for their participation.